Hello and welcome to the VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. The Victim Service Center, or the VSC, is a nonprofit organization that provides free, individualized counseling and other services to survivors of violent crime and trauma in Central Florida. My name is Hannah Jennerine, and in this episode, we will be discussing the impact of children witnessing domestic violence. Domestic violence is not merely a matter between adults. It has far-reaching consequences that can shape the lives of innocent bystanders, which is our children. As we delve into this complex issue, we'll hear from a diverse array of experts and professionals, each offering unique perspectives on this critical subject. So without further ado, let's get to it, and let's start with Leslie. Leslie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Hannah.
Of course. Can you share more about who you are, what you do, and why you're so passionate about this topic?
My name is Leslie Pender. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and qualified supervisor in the state of Florida. I actually have a practice in Metro West, Caesar Transition Counseling Services, LLC, and I'm really passionate about this particular topic because in the beginning, I worked with DCF and I worked with families who were in the process of reunifying where their children were removed from the home due to domestic violence.
What are the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral effects that domestic violence has on children who are witnessing it?
Well, Hannah, it varies because of age group. And also, we also don't want to forget the physiological impact as well. Pediatrician Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, in her TED Talk about adverse childhood experiences, shared that there's physiological as well as cognitive, behavioral, and emotional impacts. So you may see children dealing with asthma, you may see children dealing with obesity, but from a cognitive perspective, for her child, like from ages 0 to 6, you may see sleeplessness, you may see separation anxiety, you may see an increase in anxiousness when they are around the parent that may have been perpetrating the violence, or they may be more clingy to the parent who's more considered the more safe parent. When you look at ages 7 to 12, you may see increases in nightmares. You may see increase in aggressive behavior. And then in your teens, you may see a little bit more of risky behavior or self-harm. You may see school truancy. You may see increase in depression as well as aggression as well. So it varies between ages, the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral impacts of a child witnessing domestic violence.
So just to further that, you talked about the emotional aspects of cognitive and behavioral. Something that I've always been intrigued in learning about is how does domestic violence, or children witnessing domestic violence, how does that impact their attachment style as they form relationships with others as they get older?
That's a very diverse question as well. And so there is an organization, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which was formed in 2000 in Congress due to the Children's Health Act. And they focus on that actual aspect of how does a child who has been involved in witnessing domestic violence, how are they going to navigate emotional connections with others in their childhood as well as in their adulthood. There are 4 types of attachment styles. There's a secure attachment, there's anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and disorganized. And oftentimes you'll see the anxious avoidant and anxious ambivalent attachment styles arise in children, where in the anxious avoidant, they may tend to back away from connections with others, and in the anxious ambivalent, you may see a little lower self-esteem issues, the inability to really connect. They crave, but they may not want to dig deep into those type of relationships. So again, when we have those environments where the child is feeling unsafe because of the domestic violent incident, you will see the impact to their ability to trust themselves, to engage healthily in a healthy dynamic with others, particularly their parents. But as you get older, as you stated, be able to trust either themselves or their partner in that relationship.
Can you share, based on your experience, what are some effective therapeutic approaches or best practices that clinicians, mental health providers can use when helping children who have experienced witnessing domestic violence cope from that trauma?
One particular therapy that I've seen used, and actually the court system in Orange County has used it, is called child-parent psychotherapy, CPP. And what that does is within the dynamic of the child and the parent, it helps the child feel more secure and increases the bond between the parent and the child. So different strategies they may use. They may use some play therapy. They may use a lot of play therapy, actually, depending, because that particular modality is used for children 0 to 6. We may see some trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT, where there's a focus on reprocessing the trauma narrative. There's a focus on increasing relaxation skills. So when the child is triggered, they may be able to engage in activities that will help them cope and decrease their stress. And so those are two of the two primary ones that we often see. I've used TFCBT and I've witnessed CPP in process when the child is being reunified with their parent during the process of being removed from the home.
Are there any warning signs or behavioral changes that parents and caregivers should be aware of, when it comes to their children who are witnessing domestic violence? So when I say warning signs and behavioral changes, like when they see a switch or when they notice, their personality changing, is that like, how do they know, okay, my child needs to, go to therapy, or my child needs to have an intervention with a counselor or a clinician?
The main sign I would say is isolation, or even some. It might not even be isolation. You might also see separation anxiety. So the child is becoming more increased, needy, clingy, and that's more typically your younger children. But if you see isolation, if you see a lack of motivation, if you see increased aggressiveness in a child, I think those would be some of the warning signs that a parent or a caregiver may say, okay, you know what, this child has been in this environment, they've witnessed some things that may have caused them to not feel safe, so therefore there's that behavioral response of increased aggressiveness or depression or anxiety. Then they may want to seek resources such as a therapist or therapy.
There's this stigma that people or children who are witnessing domestic violence, they grow up and they're more, like you just said, like aggressive. They can also incite violence on others. Based on like your research and your experience, do you think this is true?
Not necessarily so, because oftentimes we may see the complete opposite, which may be just as bad. So there may be some level of codependency that might come up, their inability to have healthy boundaries. So yes, that may seem the normal response if they're in an environment where all they've seen is aggressiveness or intimate partner violence, that they may think that's the norm. So that sometimes there's a tendency to go that route and say, okay, this is normalized. This is how relationships are supposed to be. Well, that's not the case. Or you might also see them become really dependent, or there might be some self-sabotage. If they're unaware of what peace or love looks like in a relationship, they may self-sabotage. So not necessarily so that they're going to be aggressive. It varies from person to person. So to sit there and say that, oh, this person grew up in a domestic violent home, they're automatically going to be violent, is not necessarily the case.
So my last question for you is advice, but it comes from advice from two different aspects.
Okay.
So what piece of advice would you give for someone who was raised in a domestic violence household, who witnessed that as a child growing up in their teenage years, and it has affected them, and now as an adult they're recognizing the impact that that's had on their life? What would you advise them to do? And then also, what would you advise parents or guardians who are supporting a child, a teenager, a young adult on their journey to healing from witnessing domestic violence?
I think there's one answer to both of those questions.
Okay.
If you are noticing that means you're ready to face and to start to heal. So seek help. That could be coming from a therapist, psychologist, or school counselor, wherever that child may be. If they're having those thoughts like, you know what, I know this doesn't feel right, seek help. And it's okay to seek help. You're recognizing self-awareness is so important. It is so important in the therapeutic journey. So if you're becoming self-aware of the impact that growing up in a domestic violent home has impacted your relationships with others, that impacted the relationship that you had with yourself, it is okay to seek help.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you for the advice that you gave, your experience, and your passion for this work. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, we will be joined by Kendall Johnson to further the conversation on child protection workers. So don't go away. Welcome back to the VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. In this segment, we will be joined by Kendall Johnson, who will be sharing how narcissistic abuse in the household can affect a child's growth and development. Kendall, thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you so much for having me.
Of course. To start, can you share more about who you are, the work that you do, and why you're so passionate about this topic?
Absolutely. So my name is Kendall Johnson. I am the founder of Narcissistic Abuse Awareness nonprofit, where our vision is to create global awareness and to teach people how to trust their inner feelings, right? And our mission is to help people get to the root cause of why they attract people who hurt them and how to heal from it, move on to having a life of freedom and abundance. So that's what we do.
That's amazing. And I do want to say that I did give a workshop at Kendall's organization, and it was absolutely amazing. There's so many women there who are, ready to start their healing journey.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So how does children witnessing domestic violence in their household, how does that emotional, distress and that trauma differ when the household is not only domestic violence, but it also entails narcissistic abuse? What's the difference?
So, of course, the difference between narcissistic abuse and just regular domestic violence you can see, that's the physical abuse side of it. Narcissistic abuse is more mental and emotional abuse. So it's a big difference between the two. And the reason I'm so passionate about it and why I do the work that I do is because I am a survivor. So I grew up in a home with a narcissistic parent as well as my siblings. And how that affected my growth emotionally, relationally, I went throughout my life attracting the same abuse that I received in the household, and I didn't know why. And so a lot of times we go throughout our life and we continue to attract either those same type of friends who may abuse you and you not know it, and also relationships, intimate relationships can turn into those types of abusive relationships as well.
Can you share some of the unique challenges that children who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, within their household experience as it relates to their emotional health, their development, and their well-being?
So children, of course, have social issues. So they may, be bullied, and not know why they're being bullied. They may have social anxiety, they may have detachment trauma, and it's just so many different issues that they have as children. It may affect their schooling. It also affects their confidence, their self-esteem. It affects you in so many different ways when you're being abused at home.
So now you just shared more about the emotional effects that these children are facing. So are there any resources, in the community? Is there any resources that your organization offers to provide, healthy coping skills and strategies for these children who are victims of narcissistic abuse and domestic violence within the household?
Of course. So we are actually like a bridge, right? So we connect them to resources like VSC. We also have therapists that I've partnered with. So we pay for the therapy sessions for them. And we also provide a support group. We have a virtual support group, and we meet every first Tuesday of the month to provide resources, allow them to tell their story, and also give those resources right there on the spot as well.
Can you share more about that experience and what are some success stories that you've heard or that you see in the support group from survivors of narcissistic abuse and domestic violence that come to these groups, they share their story. What growth have you seen from them, and have they left the relationship? What are you noticing?
So from two sides. So some of them are still in the relationship.
Okay.
So once we come on virtually, some of them have their cameras off. Some of them keep their phones muted. because the spouse could either be in the other room and they can't speak. So
Right.
they'll do a lot of typing in the group chat to say, hey, I just want to listen in. I can't speak because my spouse is in the other room.
Right.
On the other hand, some of them have already left the situation. They may be going through the divorce, going through custody battles, and they want resources. Like one in particular, I was able to help give her a computer so she could apply for jobs because she didn't have a computer. So she was suffering financially and trying to, get a job. Mostly everything is virtual now. So I was able to provide a computer for her so that she could have, those resources to the internet to apply for jobs.
The term narcissist, I'm always seeing it on social media. It's a term that's become very popularized. People are becoming more aware of what a narcissist is. Could you explain more about that dynamic? What is a narcissist? What are the tactics that they use to perpetuate this emotional violence against their victims? What's their MO?
So a narcissist is a person, first of all, they were a victim at one point. And they turn into this person who is, you hear on the surface grandiose, or they're so
Right.
into themselves,
Right.
but that's just surface talk. This person looks to devour someone else, and they get more power, more energy, more, fuel,
Yeah.
if you may, at diminishing the next person. And rather that's emotional, physical, most of the time it's emotional or it's mental abuse. And the more and more they diminish you emotionally and mentally, it gives them more power over you. So it's more about the control aspect of the relationship for them.
Would you say that narcissists can change based on your experience and in the research that you've done and in the groups? Do you think these are individuals who will ever at one point in their lives recognize that, wow, I've caused significant harm to this person's life?
It's sad to say, but no, they can't change because mentally in their mind, they think they are perfect.
Right.
And if someone thinks they're perfect, then why do they need to change?
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so because of that mental disorder,
Right.
and it has kind of warped their mindset and how they think, unfortunately, no, it's no cure for narcissism.
And what happens when someone who is staying in this cycle of the trauma bond, in a sense, because that's what it is. They're addicted to the highs and the lows. Some days, based on what I've read, some days these narcissists, they'll be so nice and they'll be kind, and they'll keep up the act for a couple of weeks or a few months, but then all of a sudden they'll start criticizing and demeaning them and then using derogatory language. So what happens if someone continues to stay in this cycle? What'll happen to their mental health? What'll happen basically to their futures?
Oh, wow. So in some cases, it has been suicide in some cases. In some cases, they completely lose their mind and they end up in a psych ward, or they just end up ruining their entire lives. I've heard, stories like they've lost their degrees. People that graduate from college have a beautiful, bright future, and they get hooked up with a narcissist, and it completely just diminishes everything. They lose their degrees. They can no longer operate. And what the narcissist does, his tactic is to completely diminish you, completely isolate you from flourishing, and unfortunately, once you're in so deep mentally, you feel like you can't leave. You feel like you can't get out until it's too late.
And Kendall, the final question that I have for you today is, what is one piece of advice that you would give someone who, has recognized that they are in an abusive relationship? That relationship is narcissistic abuse. They want to leave. They don't know how to leave. They're scared. They don't have access to resources. Maybe they've been isolated. Maybe their self-esteem and their self-worth has been, drained because of the abuse, the emotional violence that's been perpetuated on them. What is one piece of advice that you would give them?
That's the bulk of what we do, is we bring forth those red flags that most people ignore. So a few red flags early on is the love bombing. They are so overly nice to you, right? That's not normal.
No.
Most people on the surface, if they're just getting to know you, it's going to be pretty much a normal chemistry, a normal relationship, a normal friendship. But if someone is just meeting you and they want to marry you next week, or they're talking about marriage in a week, or they're talking about, buying a house
love you.
and,
Yeah.
having children and just creating this whole picket white fence, the chances are that's love bombing. What's the rush, right? That's one red flag. Another red flag is when you feel in your Noah, you feel like something's quite not right about that person. The chances are it's something that's not right. Trust that inner feeling, trust your inner gut feeling, and follow that. And that's another aspect of the work we do. We teach people how to trust their inner thoughts and their inner feelings and go with that. Don't second guess it.
Kendall, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Absolutely.
And, once again, the work that you're doing is amazing. I applaud you. Having that support group is so important for survivors of narcissistic abuse.
Thanks again for having me.
Of course. If you would like to learn more about the VSC and our free services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. Call our office line at 407-254-9415 or call our crisis line at 407-500-HEAL. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone.